Okay, looking at the Palestinians, until the nation of Israel was established in 1948, Palestinian was a word that was used referring to those who lived in the region of Palestine. A Palestinian is simply a person living in the land called Palestine, which God gave to Abraham, and which was originally the land of Israel. Palestinian is a term that refers to non-Jewish people made up of both Christians and Muslims that live in the land of Israel for decades. First, there has never been a Palestinian nation. There has never been any entity or nation called Palestine, and the Arabs tried to deceive others into believing there was an attempt to change history. But the facts still remain and say there has never been a Palestinian nation. This is a hoax that has been perpetrated on the world by the Arabs to eliminate Israel. The Jews revolted against the Romans in 135 AD and were defeated. And the Romans then changed the name of Judea to Philistia, or Palestine. And that was in an attempt to disconnect the land from the name of the Israelites. So for about 2,000 years, this land of Israel has been ruled by many various invaders while the Israelites were scattered throughout the world. However, a remnant of Jews have been in the land of Israel for over 3,700 years. Some Arabs in Palestine claim to be descended from the Philistines and therefore possessed the land before Israel. However, the Philistines were invaders, and neither their homeland nor their culture exists today. Therefore, if any Arab in Palestine today claims to be a descendant of the Philistines, they are not descendants of the people that possessed the land, but descendants of the invaders of Canaan and Israel that were defeated. Some Arabs in Palestine claim to be descended from the Canaanites, but clearly this is not so. It is the Arabs' intention to deceive and lie in an effort to change history and to stir up anger among the Palestinians against Israel. It was Israel that entered the land of the Canaanites. There were some wars, but finally King David subdued the Canaanites. And most Canaanites at that time were married to Israelites. The Canaanites were assimilated into the nation of Israel. Therefore, the only people who can claim to be descendants of the Canaanites are the Jewish people who intermarried with them. So recently, the Palestinian Authority Chief Mahmoud Abbas refused to meet with Vice President Pence. This has been a few years back, but on negotiating a peace treaty. Abbas then gave a speech saying the Europeans wanted to bring the Jews here to the land of Israel from Europe in order to protect the European interest in the region. They asked the Netherlands, which then had the largest navy in the world, to relocate the Jews. Abbas also stated that Israel is a colonial project with no connection whatsoever to the Jews. This type of lying to change history incites the Arabs in the area against Israel and is a cause of much violence against Israel. The majority of the Christian Arabs in Palestine believe in Christian Palestinianism and replacement theology. Christian Palestinianism reinterprets Scripture to make Jesus a Palestinian and says the church has replaced Israel, which isn't true, by the way. Therefore, the present-day Israel is an occupying force, according to them, and not entitled to the land as replacement theology and supersessionism also teach. At the end of World War I, Israel was created out of the Ottoman Empire. The land was then a desert and a swamp with a few inhabitants who thought of themselves as Syrians and some Jews. And the Jews lived in the country since early biblical times, and their possession of the land again was made legal by the Balfour Declaration. Arabs that live in the surrounding countries were lured to Palestine by the prosperity of the Jews. Envy and hatred arose, causing massacres, killings, and rapes. The Arabs attempted to rid the area of Jews, but were unable to do so. Did the Muslims at that time believe they lived in the country called Palestine? To answer that question, it should be noted that in 1937, one of the local Muslim Arab leaders told the Peel Commission, "There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. There is no Palestine in the Bible. Our country has for centuries." He said our country was for centuries part of Syria. In 1947, the British, who held the mandate, resigned their mandate, and the UN stepped in and mandated partitioning of the territory. The Jews accepted the partition, but the Arab countries rejected it and launched a war against Israel. The Arab leaders told the Muslims and the Christian Arabs living in that area to leave so they could eradicate Israel. They were promised they could return to their homes afterward and also have the homes and properties of the Jews. The Arab exodus occurred during the few weeks after the announcement of the UN partition resolution. So the exodus was so great that the neighboring Arab countries were asked to refuse visas to any more and to seal their borders against them by the Palestine Arab Higher Committee. So today, the Arabs claim Palestinian refugees are the native people who were evicted by Israel after the war. In fact, it was the Arab leaders that encouraged the Arabs to leave Israel because they were going to destroy Israel. And about 70% of those left. So thousands of wealthy Arabs left Palestine in anticipation of the war. A UN mediator on Palestine gave a figure of 472,000 refugees. It's quite a bit. And as the Jews took over Arab cities, the Jews encouraged the Arabs living there to stay, but they left by their own choice, mostly because they feared being branded traitors to the Arab cause. Palestinians claim the right to return to the land. However, there are no international conventions, UN resolutions, or any agreements between the parties for a right to return. The number of so-called refugees has now ballooned to about 6.5 million people. For Israel to allow these 6.5 million Arabs who refuse to allow Israel to exist to come into Israel would be suicide. The Muslims would then be a majority and would change Israel into a Muslim country. And as they have done everywhere else, they would kill all Jews and all Christians, and probably all the unbelievers. One should also remember that prior to the war of 1948, the Jews living in Palestine urged the Arabs there to stay and help build a state that would give rights to all, no matter their religion or nationality. But the majority of them fled, heeding their leaders' promises that they could return and claim their property and that of the Jews once they were driven into the sea. However, there were 160,000 Arabs that stayed and became citizens of Israel. The rest of the Arabs settled in surrounding countries as refugees, countries such as Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. These countries would not and will not, to this time, allow them to become citizens of their countries. It was the Jews in the Arab lands that became refugees. The Jews in the surrounding countries were persecuted, expelled, and forced to flee from every Arab country, while the Jewish refugees were absorbed into Israel. The Palestinians who left Israel to avoid the war were never allowed to go back to their home countries and were forced to live in Palestine and called refugees. The surrounding Arab countries now use the Arabs living in the Palestine region as a political tool and a means of deceiving the United Nations. However, today the UN has become more Islamic in membership and defends Muslims against Israel. The Arab nations came against Israel again in 1967 and were defeated. The primary goal of the surrounding Arab countries is to wipe Israel off of the map. Today, this goal is still the primary goal. But a secondary goal is to establish a Palestinian nation from which they can attack and defeat Israel. Hafez Assad, the Syrian dictator, said to Yasser Arafat, the PLO leader, he says, you do not represent Palestine as much as we do. Never forget this one point. There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian entity. There is only Syria. And you are an integral part of the Syrian people. Palestine is an integral part of Syria. Therefore, it is we, the Syrian authorities, who are the true representatives of the Palestinian people. And then Walid Shubat, born in the West Bank, a Muslim who converted to Christianity, stated, as I lived in Palestine, everyone I knew could trace their heritage back to the original country their great-grandparents came from. Everyone knew their origin and was not from the Canaanites. But ironically, this is the kind of stuff our education in the Middle East included. The fact is that today's Palestinians are immigrants from the surrounding nations. I grew up well knowing the history and origins of today's Palestinians as being from Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Christians from Greece, Muslims, Shirkas from Russia, Muslims from Bosnia, and the Jordanians next door. My great-grandfather, he said, who was a dignitary in Bethlehem, almost lost his life by Abdul Qadir al-Husseini, the leader of the Palestinian Revolution, after being accused of selling land to to the Jews. He used to tell us that his village, Beit Sahar, the Shepherdsville in Bethlehem County, was empty before his father settled in the area with 6 other families. And the town has now grown to 30,000 inhabitants. Joseph Farah writes in The Midst of the Middle East, and he states, there has never been a land known as Palestine governed by Palestinians. Palestinians are Arabs, indistinguishable from Jordanians. That's another recent invention. Syrians, Iraqis, and so on. Keep in mind that the Arabs control 99.9% of the Middle East lands. Israel represents 1/10 of 1% of the landmass. But that's too much for the Arabs. They want it all. And that is ultimately what the fighting is in Israel today. Then Moshe, who was a Palestinian leader of the al-Sayqa faction of the PLO, between 1971 and 1979, stated the following. He said, the Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality, today there is no difference between the Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for the political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people. Since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism. And then there was Zuhr Moshin, if I'm saying that right, and he stated the following. He said, yes, the existence of a separate Palestinian identity exists only for the tactical reasons. The establishment of a Palestinian state is a new tool to continue the fight against Israel and for Arab unity. So it is clear that the Palestinian people are not from a nation of Palestine, but the people that were asked by the Arab leaders to leave Israel so the surrounding Arab countries could wipe out Israel. When the Arabs lost the war, they refused to let the people that had evacuated, and others that were already living in the area to return to their home countries. And therefore, they are now simply Muslim and Christian Arabs living in a region called Palestine. The Palestinians are those that are and were made refugees by the surrounding Arab and Muslim countries and are being used by those countries to help eliminate Israel. It should also be noted that Arab and Muslim countries refuse to accept the return to their country of any of the refugees they have created. So, at the end of the Arab-Israeli War in 1948, the Arab countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq, refused to accept responsibility for the welfare of the Arab Palestinians they created. And the United States then led the United Nations to establish the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. And that was to provide temporary relief pending a resolution of the Middle East conflict. It is now more than 70 years later, close to 80, I believe. And the problem still hasn't been resolved. So today, these Palestinians have magically expanded to 6.5 million refugees registered with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The growth of this United Nations Agency has grown unchecked and has 30,000 staff members. Remember, rather than help solve the refugee problem, this social welfare has enabled the Palestinian leadership to continue the refugee problem while undermining efforts to resolve it. The 30,000 staff members of the United Nations agency there are almost all Palestinians, Palestinian refugees. And a large number are activists with Hamas and Islamic terror groups. Now that we know who the Palestinians are, it is well worth looking into the education system of the Palestinians. The Palestinian schools teach their children the value of terrorism and violence. They teach a goal of eradication of all Israel. They also teach that Israel is an occupier and that the land belongs to the Arab Palestinians. So their school system is just continuing this battle against Israel. Arab and Muslim leaders oppose the teaching of an Israeli curriculum because it does not promote their hatred. The Arab and Muslim curriculum teaches students to be martyrs, teaches that Israelis are corrupt occupiers, and that the Jewish occupiers should be killed. It also focuses on the Palestinians returning to an all-Palestine homeland where Israel and all Jews have been eradicated. The Palestinian Authority does not want the truth exposed to their children, the media, nor the world at large. However, their educational system exposes their true goals of not seeking peace, but seeking only one goal, that of destroying Israel, together with the help of the Arab Muslim refugees in Palestine. The Arabs and Muslims consider Israel occupying their land and that none of the lands in the Middle East should belong to them. Since they consider it their land, any leader that makes a peace settlement with Israel would be committing a crime under the Muslim law and would be killed. No leader can make a peace settlement with Israel without paying for it with his life. Thank you for listening.